You've probably seen these before. I would hope so, they're in part 1. In the last video, we started to answer the question, which Formula 1 host country would make the best track? Also including some US states and San Marino, which is not a host country anymore. We went through the first half of the season from Australia to the UK and filled out this tier list with my own home of Great Britain down in D tier and Canada on top of the pile up in S. Today, we're going through from Belgium to Abu Dhabi to see if anyone else can make it up into the elusive S tier along with Canada. To recap the rules for this, even though some of these countries have mountains and stuff, we're assuming each of these tracks is flat and we're taking them all clockwise to keep the judgments fair. We assume every track is roughly average length for a Formula 1 track, and then, because we're dealing with countries, we have limited every country to no more corners than the actual track inside that country, which means the USA can have no more than 20 corners, the same as Qatar. Brazil is limited to 15 like Interlagos, and Italy has to make do with only 11 corners. Let's see how that goes. My name is Mr. V, a guy who used to design cars and now just draws squiggly lines in Photoshop. And let's get into it. Our first stop is of course Belgium. Belgium, the home of great beers, chocolate, waffles, fries, and the highest levels of identity fraud in Europe. That last one may not be true, I just made it up, but it is an excellent reminder to tell you about the sponsor of today's video, Incogni. Do you hate spam? I don't mind it actually, it's nice and meaty. Not that kind of spam. Oh, okay. Can you eat this raw, by the way? Ugh. If you get a load of spam emails or some oddly specific targeted adverts, that means that your personal data is being stored somewhere and sold off to companies so they can know everything about you. And who's selling your data so you get all that spam? Oh, Hormel Foods Corporation? What? No, data brokers. And the fun part about data brokers is that spam emails are actually the least bad thing your data might be used for. The alternatives are banks or recruitment services turning you down for things based on your background, or your personal data might be used to target you in an attempt at scams or identity fraud. But that's where Incogni comes in. Incogni works to find your data on data broker sites and get it removed. They send out takedown requests on your behalf and let you see the progress as tons of data brokers delete your data. And they don't just do it once, they keep checking to see if your data pops up anywhere, and they'll send out requests again and again to keep you covered. It's easy, all you have to do is create an account, give Incogni permission, and they do the rest. I did it in less time than it took to read this advert. If you want to take back control of your personal data, you can by signing up for Incogni today. And if you use the code MrVGarage, you'll get 60% off an annual plan. That's code MrVGarage for 60% off when you sign up, or you can head to incogni.com/MrVGarage. The S isn't there because you can't have an apostrophe in a URL, the technology just isn't there. Thank you to Incogni for sponsoring this video and for keeping my data safe, and now, back to the tracks. We start this video off in Belgium, which is limited to 19 corners just like Spa, but kind of spookily, on my very first draft of making a track around here, it made something with 19 corners, like it was meant to be. But the real question is, are they good corners? No. Lots of these tracks have a habit of creating S's of just too many S's. I mean, look at this thing down on the French border. Instead of Maggots and Beckets, what we have here is Maggots and Beckets and Beckets and Beckett. It's too much. If these were just a little bit elongated, I'd probably be saying, Caesar's Palace, welcome back to Formula 1. The rest of this track is fine, but there's not really anything to talk about here. Much like the actual country of Belgium, it's just sort of there. There's no significant straights to get a slipstream going, but at the same time, it's not super tight and windy like some of the other countries. Just a bit bland. For being thoroughly uninteresting, I'm going to stick Belgium down in C tier, and obviously it's not better than the actual Spa track, and so it will not be going on the is it better than the actual track board. We continue the European leg of the season in Hungary. The Hungarian gives us 14 corners to play with, but actually we only need 13 to turn this into a track, as the entire southern border turns into one enormous straight. If we assume this thing is average length for a Formula 1 track, about 5.5–6 kilometers, that means that this straight is over 2.5 kilometers long, several hundred meters longer than the entire flat out section in Baku. Sadly then, that means all of the corners are cramped into one half of the track, and actually 9 out of 13 of them are in just the first quarter of the track. I like everything from turn 8 onwards. There's some fun high-speed corners and some tricky kinks, but this run from turns 1 to 7 is diabolical. Much like Belgium, Hungary, your S's have too many S's in them. Obviously, this track is very silly, and actually the racing here would also be very silly. For that reason, we're going to have to stick Hungary down in C tier along with Belgium, as they've both committed the crime of giving me Beckett's and Beckett's and Beckett's and Beckett's and Beckett's and Beckett's and Beckett's. The Netherlands is up next. It's not a huge country, but I'll give them one thing: the shape of this place is weird as hell. Could make a good track though. We're limited to 14 corners, just like Zandvoort, and when trying to refine this place down, we end up with something like this. It's quite an interesting layout actually, and not dissimilar to Zandvoort itself, with lots of long, organic curves, giving this place a very natural flow as you drive around. And it has the exact same chicane profile as Hans Ernst. I like this, it's just satisfying to trace a racing line around here, but this place does have some setbacks. The lack of a main straight is one of them, meaning tyres never get a proper chance to rest during a lap here, and therefore a long Formula 1 race could turn into a tyre preservation competition with no one really pushing or trying to make any overtakes. I think this would be fantastic in qualifying, and with the right conditions could have a good race, but we can't guarantee that. And so as good as the Netherlands track is, and I am going to stick it up in A tier, I can't promise we'll get a banger race every time, and so I can't say that it's better than Zandvoort. After the Netherlands, we head back to Italy, but obviously we used San Marino for Imola, and so it's finally time to find out if the home of the Tifosi would make a good track. Getting this place down to just 11 corners from Monza was a challenge, but after quite a lot of tweaking, I got to this. We start the lap off with a run down the eastern coast into a hairpin at the heel of the boot, then a couple technical corners before a high-speed trip around Sicily with a hairpin for good measure, before we set ourselves up for this long straight once more up the western coast. There's a few different names we could give to this straight here, maybe the Roman Straight, the Mediterranean Straight, but I'm personally a fan of the Papal Straight. Nice little history pun for you there. That brings us into a very high-speed northern sector of the track. The medium-speed corners of 7 and 8, the fast follow-through of 9, the long winding down through 10, before one more corner around Venice where you need to get on throttle as early as possible to maximise your speed over the line. It's an interesting layout then, but I can't help but feeling that it's missing something. Other countries of low corner counts have done well, but Italy is just a bit too simple. It's missing that corner variety or the really beautiful flow to push it into the very top tier. I'm thinking B tier for Italy. While Monza is equally as simple, it does a much better job of using its 11 corners for something much more fun. It's not about the size of your corner counts, guys, it's about how you use them. Our next stop is Azerbaijan, and the Baku City Street Circuit gives us 20 corners to play with. A reasonable layout around here only actually needs 19 to create something. The lap starts off well enough. A technical hairpin with a tricky braking zone down at 2, some deceptively hard medium speed corners of 6 and 7 into the beautifully long turn 8, but then this thing goes off the rails. Hard. From turn 9 onwards, we have this brutal series of S's. Well, actually, they're not even S's. This looks more like a hill climbing course, better suited to a rally car, or maybe some Japanese kid in an AE86. But when they're flat and in a Formula 1 car, just not fun at all. Say the line, Mini Mr. V.
Caesar's Palace, welcome back to Formula 1.
Just awful. Azerbaijan clearly saw how Miami made their track in the shape of an alligator and decided they wanted an animal track too, but they chose a hedgehog. Yeah, nah, you boofed it, lads. I'm thinking D tier for this thing, and it's not going to be troubling the Is It Better board anytime soon. We have one final microstate for the tier list in Singapore, which unlike places like Monaco, still has a very normal country shape to it. 19 corners means we can get into all the nooks and crannies of the harbour areas here and create a track that looks something like this. We start the lap off with a pretty standard turn 1, and then immediately it's the swimming pool section from Monaco. But they've kind of messed up the entry speed and the details of the corner profiles, and so this thing doesn't have the magic of Lapicine, instead reminding us of the old grandstand sections from Singapore, just in reverse. We then get this big double apex protrusion in the southwest, which actually reminds me of the old Valencia street circuit. And come to think of it, This whole thing looks like the old Valencia street circuit, but kind of flipped upside down. Some fast switchbacks then along the north coast, which do look fun, but this complex is going to suffer from some dirty air problems. A technical final complex with one final tiny hairpin to bunch cars up before crossing the line. It's not awful then. The run from 9 to 17 would be a lot of fun to watch, but this track would suffer from significant dirty air problems, making following closely tricky, and therefore we'd get a lack of overtakes in the race. Much like actual Singapore. It does do a good job of capturing the feel of the actual marina-based circuit, both requiring a high level of technical skill to get a quick lap around here. So I'm gonna say it's a solid, B-tier circuit. Now I'm torn. Does it go on the Is It Better board? They both have similar vibes actually. Both have some fun high-speed corners and some technical slow corners, and maybe too many slow corners. It's a hard one to decide. But I am thinking from vibes from that high-speed middle sector of this new track, I am going to stick it up on the board. Off then to the United States, home of the United States Grand Prix, and 2 other Grand Prix, but we'll get onto that. This is obviously a big old country. Well, I guess not an old country, a pretty young country, all things considered. This is a big country, which is mostly a rectangle, but it does have quite a lot of detail, particularly around the edges. And so the 20 corners we get from Qatar go to create something like this. We start the lap along the long Canada border, which is obviously a straight line in real life, but it does appear curved here. The reason for that is you won't catch me dead using a Mercator projection. This brings us down into turn 1, which is basically 130R, a concept which I find hilarious for a first corner, thank you USA, but it does mean we're going to have about 5 DNFs every time we start a race here. To clarify, that's not a bad thing, just a very silly thing. We then have a bit of a loop up around New England, which is actually reminiscent of Village and the Loop from Silverstone. Some mini S's, and then the long run down into the hairpin at Florida. The rest of this lap is then kind of wild. You have a cheeky chicane down at New Orleans, a long left-hander into a hairpin, which would be unbelievably tricky to nail. Another chicane, and at this point your tyres are going to be screaming, but you have to get this right because it sets up this enormous flat-out section through the kink of San Diego and up the entire west coast. This place is tough. This track ticks all the right boxes then. It's got a good variety of corner speeds, high speed corners, low speed corners, medium speed corners, and it adheres to the best practices of modern F1 track design, which basically means long straights into hard braking zones, of which this has 3. This complex from turns 5 to 8 does concern me a little bit by being goofy, but other than that, this place would bang for modern Formula 1, and actually for any motorsport really. I'm feeling that the USA should go up in S tier, along with its northern neighbour Canada, but for the record, I do think Canada's better. And actually, regarding the Is It Better board, as good as the Circuit of the Americas is, the Circuit of America, that's going to get confusing, I think could give us slightly better racing, and so it's going on the board! That's going to be tough to beat, but Mexico does have a pretty interesting shape and 17 corners to play with, and so it's got a chance. Turning this into a track, we get this, and yeah, it's pretty good. A chicane brings you over the line into a decent length straight into a hairpin. Then there's another straight into another hairpin. Hang on a second. That's just the end of the Donington Park Grand Prix circuit. This is followed by one more chicane, which I could do without, to be honest, before we swing it through turn 5 and kick off an absolutely stunning high-speed section. You also have to get things slowed down for turns 6 and 7, but then we have a naughty kink into the high-speed turn 9, a huge long left-hander, very reminiscent of the old turn 3 from Sochi, i.e. the only good corner at Sochi, another kink, another medium-speed sweeper, and then another high-speed chicane. This place is pretty fun then, with some good corner concepts, in particular this run from turns 7 to 12, but it does have some setbacks, particularly the chicane in the first sector, which means we have 4 slow corners in a row, which just gets a bit tedious. Honestly, the northern section of this track along the Gulf is an S tier for me, but the Pacific section, it's a bit mid, and it brings the overall rating down. I was really hoping we could get another S tier out of Mexico, but overall I'm going to have to stick it in A tier. That's pretty good, and it's definitely not bad news for Mexico, as when we compare it to Hermanos Rodriguez, one of the worst tracks for modern Formula 1, this place is clearly better, and so it is going on the Is It Better board. We head south to Brazil next, and while, yes, technically the name of this race is the Sao Paulo Grand Prix, look, I want to do Brazil, you want me to do Brazil, let's just all pretend it's still called the Brazilian Grand Prix like it used to be and carry on, okay? Turning this into a track gives us something high speed and flowing, not unlike the actual track between the lakes. The flow through here is beautiful. Until turn 9, and then it's kind of good, but only good. The slowest corner around here is turn 12 in the middle of the rainforest section, and actually this whole section does remind me of the middle sector of Interlagos, but sadly not with quite the same magic. Other than that, this track is a high-speed blast, but I am concerned once again about dirty air problems. You would never see an overtake for position down at turn 3 because the follow-throughs of turns 1 and 2 make that impossible. Turn 6 is a valid overtaking opportunity and does allow fights to continue around turn 7, but that's pretty much it on this track. Potentially a good qualifying circuit, but I think not the best for an actual Formula 1 Grand Prix. I do really like the look of this place, but it pains me to say it might only be B tier. And as you might have guessed, this thing is not better than Interlagos. To be honest, even if it was up in A or even S tier, it may still not be better than Interlagos. That's not too much of a loss for the Brazil circuit. We begin the final triple header of the season in Las Vegas, and so like Miami, we're going to look at the state it sits in, Nevada. Nevada, like many of the states in the western USA, was drawn with a ruler, and so we do not need all 17 corners from the actual Las Vegas Strip circuit, instead getting something with just 6. What do we talk about here? It's got a long straight, then a shorter straight, then a kind of medium-sized straight, then one more along the Utah border, then into some actual corners down by the city of Las Vegas, and well, that's it. It's obviously very basic, but ironically, if F1 did try this, you would see absolutely tons of overtakes here, as DRS would be king. That doesn't mean it would be exciting though, as 90% of the viewing experience is just watching people draft each other. You might enjoy that, but it's not really in the spirit of circuit racing. I think it's one to leave for the stock car fans. A very simple, pretty silly circuit then, but I am still going to stick it up in C tier, because while there's nothing particularly interesting here, there's nothing wrong either. It just kind of is. It's not better than the Las Vegas Strip circuit though, and so we head off to the Middle East to trackify our final 2 countries of the season. The geography of Qatar is very similar to that of Bahrain, being a tall, narrow island, but Qatar is significantly bigger than Bahrain, and so lots of its smaller features get rounded out to give us a very ovular circuit. Obviously, the first thing we need to address is, what the hell have you done here, Qatar? What is this? So the lap starts out with a flat out kink, similar to Copse at Silverstone, into a lopsided chicane, which I actually think is pretty good. But then we get to this. This is probably the worst sequence of corners we've seen in either of these videos. This is some medieval torture device type of track design. The worst of this is obviously turns 4 to 7, but then they throw in one more awful chicane with turns 8 and 9 to just kick you when you're down. It's a shame because the rest of this track, it's not bad, I don't mind it. Qatar has turned up with a pretty simple high-speed track with a racing feel similar to the actual Lusail circuit, which sits down by turn 14, in case you're wondering, but they've then ruined it with this section, which, and I can't believe I'm going to say this, is starting to make me miss Lusail. Qatar is therefore going down in D tier, and while I am definitely not a fan of the Lusail circuit, I will admit it's better than this thing. Ugh, get it away from me. Surely it has to pick up again with the United Arab Emirates, home of our season finale, the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. The UAE is a much larger country and also a more country-shaped country. We have 16 corners to play with thanks to Yas Marina, and so we do lose some of the detail up along the coastline in the north, leaving us with this. A high-speed circuit then, with a long kink straight down in the south and another one up along the coast by Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Our first corner of the lap is a tight hairpin at turn 2, which is going to be interesting on the opening lap. We then wind the speed up through turns 3 and 4 before getting on the brakes again just a little bit for turns 5 and 6, which are trying their hardest to look like the layout of Eau Rouge Radion, but remember, this one is flat. Still tricky though to keep your speed up through here and maximize your run up to turn 7, where we begin the technical half of this lap. There are a couple nice corner profiles in here. I think 10 into 11 could be very interesting, but overall, it's not that exciting. I do think the circuit could be good for overtaking due to the massive flat out sections, and the back half would be interesting in qualifying, but overall, this doesn't really have the flow necessary to make it a top tier track. Overall, it sits on that boundary between A and B tier on our tier list, but to be cautious, I'm going to stick it down in B tier, mainly because the second half of the lap is just a bit too stop-start. But then we have to ask the question, is it better than the actual track in Abu Dhabi? You know what, this might be controversial, but I actually think the Yas Marina track is pretty good. It's just that in Formula 1 we get boring racing here because lots of the time the season is already decided by the time we arrive. And so no, while the UAE track is alright, it is not going on the Is It Better board. And that means that our entries onto the board after these two videos are Saudi Arabia, Florida, Monaco, Canada, Singapore, the United States, Mexico, and maybe Spain. Which begs the question, why did none of these countries just do this? And that's all 24 countries, meaning this is our final tier list of every Formula 1 host country as a Formula 1 track. I'd love to know your opinions of these ratings down below. This video was interesting, to be honest. Dealing with logos in the past meant we had lots of harsh angles and awkward, unnatural sections, but countries typically have very natural borders, and so I think we've ended up with lots of tracks that look like, well, real tracks. I'd love to know which of these you would like to see in a sim to test out just how good or how awful they actually are. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, why not give it a like down below? Subscribe if you'd like to see more green screen based motorsport nonsense, and until next time, I've been Mr. V, and I'll Mr. C you later.